Jessica.
Hi.
We've actually known each other for quite some time.
It's been a long time now.
And not only that, we've seen each other through pretty big milestones. Not to mention that you married me and Matt.
One of my
in this
favorite credits to my name. Anytime someone mentions you and they're like, Johnny's great. I'm like, I know Johnny's great. I married him and his husband.
You get a special bit of ownership because of that.
Yeah, I feel like it's a very, I catch myself being like, don't be territorial over this friendship.
But also, if something goes wrong in our marriage, there's also an equally important amount of ownership that you take for that too.
I feel so confident in your marriage that I would take responsibility. I feel so confident in you and Matthew.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have to start out by telling you something that I love about you so much.
Thank God.
And I want to know if you've heard this before. One of my favorite things about you as a person is you are so positive, but you've got some grit.
Thank you.
Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
Because there's nothing worse than just a positive person.
Yes. And I think that is something that people are always a little surprised about. Because especially people be like, you're so nice.
How could you?
But also you kind of, that was a strong thing to say in that moment.
Which is it's my preference in general, like, the people I gravitate to are like generally more positive than negative, you know? But then it all falls apart if they're just positive. It's so vanilla.
Yeah. And it's not real.
Yes.
Right? Like there's that part of you that I think I've been realizing how often like, that positive or negativity in what you're attracted to in a person. And I think that there is something when someone's like just positive that you're like, I don't fully believe what you're saying.
Yes. There's also this flip side of the coin too, where like I have to get over being like uncomfortable around people who aren't always smiling at me.
Especially after this year, right? When it was like, I had the first interaction. I've been traveling. I went to Ohio to visit my family for a month.
You were traveling.
And I came home and walked into my courtyard for my apartment. And I saw someone in the apartment building who was
home to Chicago or
home to Chicago.
Okay.
So after being in Ohio.
Yeah.
And in that month, all of the regulations kind of opened up. And so it was my first time. I wasn't wearing a mask walking into my courtyard. Someone who was not wearing a mask was walking towards me. And I was like, oh my God. And he was like, hey, how are you? And I was like, oh, really great. Thank you. Have a good day. And I hadn't realized how ready for a conflict I had been in that moment, like how tense I was until this person, I feel like just walking down the street, I haven't gotten like smiles or positive hellos or greetings just because we're all masked up and protecting yourself.
You're so far behind the mask, like that you just feel like, what's the point of like doing the hello sort of thing, especially to like a stranger. Yeah,
exactly.
You're right.
There's something like, I think just even covering your face that you're like, oh, I must not be allowed to talk. And it's like, no, that's not true.
I don't know if I've ever felt that way, but I'm not allowed to talk because of a mask.
People recognize me because of my distinctive hairstyle, walking around my neighborhood all the time. And I feel like after this last year, they might be like, and she's so mean.
No, pish posh.
Thank you.
So Jessica is a director, as we've already touched on, and is a performer as well, and a writer, and just has been in the comedy world for a long time. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like this coming year, as sketch shows are getting underway, as like comedy's coming back. The subject matter. Matt and I saw a sketch show, and we both felt there was some like COVID jokes in it, and like we were both like not like at the expense of like someone, but like references to COVID, and we were like, oh, you know what? This conversation feels like it's tired already, doesn't it? Yes. And you're in the weird position of like you can't completely ignore it, right? But there was part of it like, you know, if you still got into an Uber today and you talked about to the Uber driver about being in an Uber and ask them what it's like, it's like, okay, we've done that now for like 7, 8, 9 years.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
And I feel that way with like when we went to this show, wherever it was, I won't disclose.
I can't imagine. There's so many sketch shows that are
they're
up
running
and happening
in Chicago
right now.
Yeah. But the show was there's only a couple jokes, but we were just like, oh, I don't know if I want to hear any jokes. I almost want them to like skip the joke or like acknowledge that joke's out there and then just kind of move on. You know, it's very interesting. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that in the comedy world?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I feel like as soon as you're in the room, I think that's one of the greatest things about sketch comedy, and especially live sketch comedy, which is that you can truly be reacting to the current moment. And I think we saw that a lot with like the Trump material.
Yeah.
That it was like, it felt like for 1 week you had to talk about it. And then the next week it was already dated in a real way. And I think that that's the same thing about COVID. We've been talking about it so much. I look over a lot of satirical essays. And so one of the trends I noticed for a while was like, oh, you had to talk about COVID. And I think that there are still angles that you haven't seen yet. But they're few and far between.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you'd almost have to be so surprising. But I think that almost opens us up to, like, if you're doing a topical show for a large group of people,
right,
what do you think you have to cover? And I guess at this point, I would almost say, like, nothing. You don't have the obligation to talk about anything because everyone else is talking about it. Every other comedy source is already talking about it. Probably Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Like, we've already seen weeks of it before you get to that live show.
Yeah. I wonder, too, if we're just going to, like, you know, over the past, I don't know how long, there's been a while where comedy's been shifting so much, too, right? Where, like, not only, like, was this last administration so, like weird and it's, like, it's almost too bizarre to handle, right? Yep. Like, the country's become more polarized and more, I think there's more things that people would consider offensive in general that you're working to avoid and be mindful of. And of course, your goal would never hopefully to be mean-spirited to begin with, but just to know what's like what people can feel bad about, even if you didn't mean something bad by it, right? So you're kind of like, I don't know. I wonder if we're going to see a shift away from all this like political based comedy that's like grown so much in the past years, like Jon Stewart and like all those like news-based shows, and if it's just gonna like have to go back to like wackadoo character Jim Carrey, like, you know what I mean, like Adam Sandler, sort of just like that kind of comedy, because it seems like it's a landfill. What's a landmine?
Yeah.
When there's a lot of landmines, what do you call that?
A space with a lot of landmines.
Yeah, it feels like a space with a lot of landmines, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, you know, like comedy does like ebb and flow, and I'm wondering if we're going to see a shift away from like, maybe not, that political comedy, because it's so hard to handle, and the audience is always so, I don't know, on the extremes. You have a feel?
I do. I'm like, yes. I have noticed myself. I was even thinking today, like, so much of the comedy that I want to see, whether it's like in a rehearsal or in a classroom, I've noticed that I personally am like, this has to be fun.
Yeah.
Like, why would I be watching something if it is not bringing me joy? And I've seen really great political pieces, but they still have to hit an element of like joy and unexpectedness. I think it's just harder, which I'm not mad about. I would love to see... Again, because what we're watching is so much great stuff from John Oliver, or like Patriot Act, I felt like made really serious topics so fun and dynamic to watch. And so I think that there's just a level of, again, are you doing this because you think we have to check this box?
Right.
Or are you bringing something new to the conversation? Are you adding an element of theatricality? Are you adding an element of like surprise, or that only you can talk about this, or this like convey something unique that I think is good?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. There has to be something playful and joy there. And I think too many people lean into the fact that I'm going to say something I know the audience will like and will misconstrue cheering for that point of view as it being comedic.
I was just listening to a stand-up comedian who I don't remember the name of talk on a podcast about that exact thing.
I might have heard that same, that just maybe where that thought came from. I feel like that was not mine.
No, but it was the same idea that like now we've gone in the last couple of years of being in a space where you say something and everyone does cheer and applaud. But when does that become having to make a joke?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we must have listened to the same podcast. That must be
How
where that came from.
exciting. True friends
People
listening to podcasts.
and not remembering which one it was.
But I think I hadn't really thought about that before. Or I guess also because I don't hang out a lot in the stand-up world. Where it was like, oh, I hadn't necessarily seen that shift. But I believe it to be true.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested too to like nowadays in Chicago, like something I think that is true is that actually we have like a pretty liberal audience. So also making sure that that comedy is like making fun of ourselves even more than like pointing out a problem that everyone in the room agrees with, right? So it's like what again is the new topic or the new way of thinking about it. But if the entire room already agrees, why would you spend, if I'm not shedding new light on a topic, what am I doing?
I feel as someone who's liberal and frustrated oftentimes with liberal people, I feel like that's exactly the angle that like needs more exposure from ourselves.
Yes.
Is that deprecating like sense of humor rather than scoring a point that we already like know the point's going to be scored. You know what I mean? Like we all agree on this, It's like, wait, what can we say about ourselves? Yeah.
Yeah. And especially in those spaces, some spaces really do bring together like a melting pot of people, but few do in the live community right now. So if you know your audience already thinks something coming in, how are you playing with that expectation?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's
man. I want to reference a joke I heard on Instagram the other day, but I can't remember the Chicago performer's name, so I better not. But it was a good example of like the first half of the joke was, oh, never mind. I'm so sorry.
No,
everyone.
we have to.
I can't say it because I can't remember for certain who said it. But it was doing that very thing where it's like it was making fun of us. The first half of the joke was making fun of like the liberal point of view, and then the second half, like I don't know, it felt like then there was like another joke there that was supposedly making fun of the conservative point of view, but it's like just end on the making fun of us liberals. It's fine.
Yeah,
like
in rooms where liberals have the power, you have to make fun of the liberals, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's not every room, but it is being aware of who the audience is. And I feel like a lot of the times when I walk into a class now, but that has even shifted a little bit, which has been interesting as things who the audience is now that it's not people who have had to travel to be in a classroom in the same physical location.
Yep.
There is something really exciting about opening up a Zoom room and having a true, still not super, super diverse in terms of thought, but more than before, which has been exciting.
Yeah, it is. I'm also like, just to real briefly touch on like Zoom stuff, I will say like in the last couple weeks, I realized actually how much I actually do love having those classes on Zoom.
I love that.
Because I've gone through such an arc of like, no.
Are you in person? Are you teaching anything in person or directing
I am.
anything in person?
I'm teaching one class in person right now, an adult like level 1 class, and they're all wearing masks, and it's so much harder than online.
Yeah.
And it's just so the thing that I was going to say about what I liked about Zoom that I didn't realize is I didn't realize, because it was the first time stepping back to in person, and with a mask on, they all looked like kind of terrified the whole time. I just saw their eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so like I was trying to loosen them up. But then I also remembered that like, man, that's often the feeling in a room for the first day anyways. But then I thought about it and I was like, I almost never felt that online. And I taught a bunch of drop-ins and first day classes, and people were just more comfortable at home immediately.
Yeah.
Bizarrely so. Like there was less of a hurdle.
I love that because I think it's true. And in some ways,
Oh, can I have you pull that mic just a little closer there?
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, I think the same thing. And it's also fun because in some ways you're asking more of them because it's like, I see your bedroom. Like, hey, is that your roommate who just like yelled over there? Yeah. Or like, I teach a private class for a woman, and every day she'll be like, all right, and I have to tell my child that I'm not dying. And she'll be like, hey, I'm in improv class, I'm not dying. Because the amount of times that she's like yelling or screaming, and the daughter will walk in and be like, hey. Like, that's really vulnerable.
Yeah.
But there is a level, first of all, that can never happen because we are just too far away. So I would not be working with this person. But also there's a true level of freedom that comes when you can go and open up the door, or like people are taking chances that I feel like they might not take in a rehearsal space where it's like, these are our walls. This is the playing area.
Yeah.
You know the rules.
Yep. 100%.
I am hesitant to teach in person while people are still wearing masks. That was kind of a
rightly so
line in the sand.
I think I'm happily taking a paycheck. Is that awful to say?
No,
but also here's the thing: is the second time we met, it felt easier. I also went in with the point of view for the second class of like, I'm not going to worry about making them laugh or have fun.
Ooh,
I'm just going to communicate clearly the exercises and the point of view. Because you put that stress on yourself. We've talked about this before. You put that stress on yourself to like make it fun.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right. Why wouldn't you? However, when like, the class is like, just looks at you like nervous eyes behind a mask, it's like, they might be actually grinning at me from ear to ear,
Yeah.
And just not laughing as much because they're nervous. But I was just like, I'm just going to like let it be whatever it needs to be. And it felt better that way too. Way better.
I'm interested in that too, because I think something that the improv community is not really talking about, or like I have not necessarily received any training on, but one of the things that we're talking about at the theater I work at in London is like how to train teachers, because I do think that coming back in person is harder than we've expected. So like, I actually think even if I'm enjoying this improv class, I'm like, oh, I'm closer to this person. Like these are a lot of people. Like that it's not the improv. It's like, oh, I'm doing something I haven't done for a year. And that is actually playing out mentally in a whole bunch of other ways. It's more stressful than I thought. And I don't know how to deal with that. Yep. Yeah, I think everyone's like, we're just going to go back in person. It's going to be great for everyone. And I think everyone's like, this is great. And I'm also exhausted and kind of stressed out. And I don't know why. Matt
and I have been saying that about hanging out with people. Yeah. Like as we're starting to hang out with people, my husband and I, we're like, oh man, like I always have like low level anxiety about everything all the time. Yeah. I just power through it.
I do too.
Yeah. Which we should talk about this. In general, I feel this way, but like more like there's like been a couple like in-person things, and I'm like, oh, like I wanted to like kind of like dart out a little early and whatnot. And he was Matt was observing that same thing.
Really?
Yeah. Of like, oh yeah. Especially we saw some people too that we like don't know as well.
Yeah.
And that felt like, oh man, we're gonna hang for a while. You know what I mean?
Yes. With these, yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't, these weren't like best friends, but they were people that like, oh, we haven't,
Yeah. I just got invited to something and it was like, do you want to do this? And I was like, yeah. And it was like, oh, and can so-and-so and so-and-so come along? And I was like, oh, yeah. But I noticed, and maybe that's part of it too, is that for a year we've had to be so like, what's worth it? Right?
Oh, sure.
Or like, oh, I do want to see this person and I'm willing to take these risks.
Yeah.
And now I feel like maybe it's just more in tuned with like, I don't want to spend my time there. There's nothing wrong with it, but I am aware that like my emotion went down and I never would have given myself the space to do that before, to be like, well, I'm sure they're fine. Or like, I'm sure that restaurant's fine, but I don't know that I want to spend my time at that restaurant today.
I think there's something like across the board true about like feeling like we've had more options to be choosy this past year.
Yes.
And like, and I don't know how long we're going to try to like hold on to that, or how long we're going to think we can be able to hold on to that. We're like, nope, sorry, life's a moving forward.
Yep.
But like, there's certainly a feeling of like, oh, I don't want to disrupt my day for something. And like, I got so used to like living a retired, semi-retired life where it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, I'm going to go work online for a little bit and then poof, I'm done. you know?
I got a work message on my way here, and it was like, hey, did you take care of this, this, and this? And I was like, I'm not working right now. And I feel like I know for a fact 4 months ago, I would not have thought that it really was, it's like slowly drawing those boundaries of being like, oh, wait, this is when I do this and this is when I don't, which is constantly, to your point, being tested. And I don't know if in a week I'll have the same boundary that I do right now.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to play with it and to hear other people advocating for theirs and to be like, oh, when do we line up? And when do we not? And what happens when we don't? And it's like, okay, then we're not getting together, and that's okay too. We're like, then we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this way. Okay. Which is cool.
Okay. Just total guess, shot in the dark. You know, we've had a year where, you know, like almost all the performing arts went away or tried to stay online, and it was not worth watching, in my opinion. I feel like, like studying online was okay for the performing arts and taking like acting classes and improv and whatever and writing classes. I feel like there was value in that, but I felt like everything I saw that was performed online, I was like, no thanks, for me. But you know, like theaters are gone. Maybe people moved away. People moved you know, out. Do you have a sense of like, maybe more even specifically in Chicago, of like, I'm going to phrase this to you two ways. Do you have a sense of what might emerge? Or two, I'm going to give you a magic director wand. And like, what would you want to emerge? Because I know you have like such an already artsy and like fun sense of what you like anyways. Like if you're like rebuilding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what do you want to see more of?
I'm really excited to see more grassroots endeavors. I was talking maybe a couple months ago with a woman who put together a whole series of theater performances in the windows of places. So you did like a walking tour through the neighborhood and just saw like snippets of, and I was like, that
was it silent, or did you have like an audio component you were listening to?
I don't know, because she was just, I missed it.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was silent, but I might be wrong about that.
Okay.
But I think it was like walking through like kind of a gallery of performance pieces.
That's cool.
And watching like Stepping Stone Theater has started to do some like live performance stuff. And it just looks like people sitting in chairs, watching comedy, laughing, and like, that's it. And it looks like really fun. Like, it's like, oh, that's a room I would be excited to walk into. Yeah. And more experiences. So I think that that's part of it too, is I think when I think about the shows that I did not enjoy watching, it's, I don't think it's because it's better live. I think it's because when I'm in person with the show, I can't leave. And there's just this element of like...
There's a lot of truth to that. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think when people are like, oh, the improv here isn't better than here. I'm like, it's the same improv. You're just... It's not the same because an audience has bought in and they know that they're not going anywhere for 60 minutes. Where if I'm on my computer,
click.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm excited just to see all performance care about the audience more, because I think that was part of what happened to me, was like, oh, maybe I don't, it's not that I don't want to see a virtual version of a play. It's that I probably didn't want to see that play. Or I don't want to sit and be talked at anymore. So now when I go to any kind of performance, I don't need like audience participation, but I do want to feel like my presence matters in some way. And that going there is an experience beyond what typically has been a theatrical experience, which is that like I get dressed up, I wait in line, maybe we get dinner before or we get dinner after, we get drinks, like that. I think there's something about the whole experience even more than the product. And I'm willing to change my mind about this But it was one of the biggest things I felt was like, oh yeah, that production wasn't good. But I don't know. I think why we go to the theater is a little different than just watching the art that's on stage. And I think giving ourselves credit, or hopefully making theater that takes advantage of all those other reasons why people go to a theater.
And just to be like a little bit more on the nose with it, like what are some of those other things that like, if like you're like just brainstorming out loud, like this is like, I want to see like these sort of variables used more. I want to see them like what does it mean to like not just perform up there, but like invite the audience out?
I think I want to see more like, I think the great thing about comedy is that we get to make a joke out of the given circumstances. So I would be interested in like, if I'm going to go see a comedy show, not just wearing a mask, but like it being a joke of how far apart we are or how close we are, or like playing with proximity in a way that doesn't make it feel like we're ignoring it or doing something that we have to do responsibly, but we're actually like making a joke out of it. Yeah. And that if we know a show is going to be shorter, how do you take full advantage of that show being a little bit shorter? By having like a ticking clock. Like, how do you just make us aware? Yeah,
instead of pretending like these like caveats are like we're just going to ignore them and do the best within this context as we can. It's like, how do you incorporate those caveats as well?
Yeah.
You know, I think you and I have talked a couple times about like, for me, as weird as it sounds, like two of my favorite shows I've ever seen in Chicago haven't been comedy or improv. Well, they've been the Fly Honey show.
The best.
Which is, I think you could describe it better. I think it's the whole idea of it is like they invite people who aren't dancers and performers into a routine with professional dancers and performers and musicians. And it's very body positive, like dancing. And like, it's the coolest. Like you walk in there and it's like, your like hair stands up on your arms because like it's like there's a jazz band playing. It's like feels like a party's happening. They like move through the audience. My friend Eli, who you directed me and Eli and things, has like the best physicality in the world as like a bigger guy too, and just like fucking killed it in that show. And it was so fun to like cheer for him, and like this context was such a party.
Yeah.
And the other show, I think it may have changed its name a number of times. It's that like, I don't know how to say it, like a speakeasy sort of circus that you like had to go to was it Midnight Circus or
Sanctuary Circus?
Yes.
And it was in that like church. Those are my two favorite shows.
Yes.
In the city.
And they were like such an experience, and there's so much that was in that show that was kind of breaking your expectation. Maybe that's how people felt about Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind when it was in its like heyday.
Yeah, where you would like, and they did the same thing, right? So like you roll a die to pay.
To figure out how much you're going to pay your ticket. Yes, I remember that.
Name tag.
Fuck, I got the more expensive ticket. This doesn't feel fun.
Those dice had to be weighted, right?
Yeah.
I feel, I'm not accusing them, but
you might as well. As
I'm accusing them. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And then what they would do is, for people who haven't seen it, they'd have it 99 scenes or 100 scenes on like wires, and they'd reach up and they'd grab one of those like numbers and they'd perform that scene. And those scenes could be anywhere from like sketch comedy to weird performance art pieces to, I saw a girl like wearing a skirt, dropped her panties and took an ice cream cone and just like shoved it in her. You know what? I was like, okay, that's that. Art. And that was that piece.
Yes. That's so funny. I was going to say that the scene I always think of remembering the Neo-Futurists is that they had 3 people come on stage and just write letters, and you just watch them write letters while music played. So I like that our 2 scenes are so very different from each other. Are examples of what you would see.
God. It was very funny when I saw that show. I think it was right when I moved to Chicago, and it you could feel that even though they updated the scenes, it felt like it was cutting edge in the like 90s or the 80s whenever it started. And they didn't, I don't know. And there was some elements of it that were pretty like lecturing the audience. And I was like, nah, but I get it. I get that this is a fun, cool, different experience. and interesting, but there were some elements about it that as a show, I was like, yeah.
I agree. I think I was like, ooh, I really like this version of what it could be in my head, taking all of these things, but like adjusting them slightly.
Yeah.
But I think there's something in that too, that like, what is it about being an audience that you're like, there's something off. Or this feels dated to circle all the way back to what we started with the COVID material, right? Where it's like, oh, this just feels not relevant. And that can happen with material, but it can also happen with structure or like the format. Or because I think something that threw me off in that show was that it was so, part of the joy of it is that it's so pushed together. But I was like, oh, like frantic. But I think there was almost a part of me that wanted it to be like a little more like put together in some way. And I was like, oh, that's not...
More polished?
Yeah.
Easier put together?
I think so. But I think that there was an element of like, even just watching people like throw the numbers. I feel like I'm really diving deep into the show.
No, please do. They're not around. You can't hurt them anymore.
Oh, good. Then I have a lot of opinions.
We're not going to affect their roll of the dice ticket sales.
Yeah. Yeah, there was just something about it that wanted it to be a little more clever in that way. That you see something that used to serve you. What are the things that used to serve us that don't anymore?
Yeah. 100%. I was going to ask you this as a director, what do you feel as a director? What makes a good director? Because you have this weird thing, right, where it's like you have to deal with the what the ensemble thinks is funny. Mm-hmm. You have to deal with what maybe you might think is funny. You have to deal with what we all might think the general public think is interesting, or I should say interesting or funny, considering. What do you feel like? What are some of the good traits as a director that like you appreciate? Yeah. And like, how do you navigate some of those different expectations of like what a show should be from everybody in the cast and like yourself?
Yeah, I think it's
a loaded question.
No, I love it. A lot of parts
I gave you already.
I think there's an element of taking ownership over it without being in control of it, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, I care about this and I am going to breathe life into everything, but it's not about doing it my way. And I guess also something that has helped me in sketch comedy is knowing that all I have to do is like, so many things are better when I'm like, here's what I see, here's the problem, here's how I think to fix it. But that doesn't mean I want you to fix it exactly how I told you. And so often with that liberty of then someone going away and being like, here's what I did, it's like, oh yeah, that's so much better. Like that I can diagnose, it's not having an end goal of what something has to be in terms of either a scene or a show, but being honest about being like, oh, this doesn't work and it's missing X, Y, or Z. So being clear about what a scene needs and what an actor needs, that isn't about fixing. It's not your job to go in and like give a line reading or tell exactly what that joke should be. But it is about helping someone hear the rhythm of a scene if they don't maybe hear it, or helping someone to have the technical tools if maybe they're lacking those technical tools of like, oh, the dialogue is too clunky. Here's a simple technique that you probably don't know to help fix that dialogue. So I think one of the things that I really find watching a director to be really exciting is when someone clearly has a point of view and clearly cares, but they're using it to add an element of freedom to the process rather than an element of control. And I don't think I had that when I first started, which I think is also why I value it so much when I watch someone do it. I'm like, oh, you let something happen and grow, and you picked the best parts of it to keep developing. You didn't like micromanage that plant into growing the exact way you thought that plant needed to grow in order to create the bouquet you had decided in your head should be there. Yeah.
That's good. You know, there's also this other component of this too. And like you and I both have the experience of some of the avenues that we've worked in, that the you sometimes, or maybe even oftentimes, get to like try the show out in front of the audience.
Yeah.
Which that's a different animal, and you get there's different, like, I don't know, the whole process then becomes different, right? Because there's so much more guesswork in a show that you didn't test out. You know, the 2-man show that you kindly came in and did some directing on?
Yes.
That show, I wish I would have had set myself up to do some previews on and test that show. Because we, you know, it's so hard to create that stuff in a vacuum. Like every stand-up goes out and tries their jokes over and over, right?
Yeah.
Second City creates a show that has, how long is that process?
Like 10 weeks.
10 weeks.
7 nights a week for 10 weeks.
In front of like a bunch of people. Like,
yeah.
That show's often really good, but it better be fucking good.
Yeah.
10 weeks?
Yes.
You're like, that's so much time to test out material. Like, that's such an awesome opportunity. But, you know, when you create something in a vacuum and, like, try to, like, figure out that process, that's a whole different beast, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the biggest... I would be hesitant. Obviously, there's no way to control it, and you're always like, okay, I'll do whatever. I would always rather test something in front of an audience. And I think 9 times out of 10, this is a Mick Napier thing, I think.
Give him credit regardless and maybe misconstrue it.
If it wasn't Mick Napier, he probably told whoever it was and it filtered through. But like, if you're testing something in front of an audience, it also takes away so much of the work. Like, if I'm an actor bringing in a scene and I just test it in front of the audience, that tells me so much more than if I'm sitting at my computer for an hour trying to write something. And the same thing if I'm a director who's like, I don't know if this works or not. Let's go back and forth and talk about it, or let's put it in front of an audience and immediately tell. Like, what a joyful way to create material.
I know.
And like,
also what a fortunate position to be in to be able to do that too.
Yes. Yeah, I think Chicago is unusual. Whenever I think of leaving Chicago, I think that there is a creation ethic that makes it really hard to beat anywhere else in the world. Yeah. I don't know of anywhere else that is so accepting and embracing of the process of like trial and error and building something on its feet.
I don't know if I have enough experience trying stuff other places.
Yeah,
but I agree that Chicago does do well with that.
Yeah.
And fosters that. Do you think that have you been involved in projects that aren't comedic, where you sometimes tested the material out in front of an audience, or the show out in front of an audience as you worked on it and wrote it and created it, and then other times created in a vacuum and then performed it? And when the end goal isn't necessarily laughter, if you have worked on these sort of projects, do you still feel that process is as necessary and as helpful, or how that might be different? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of just like pure drama. Normally, if someone's seeking me out to work on something, it's because even if they want to talk about something really serious, they want to do it with an element of comedy. But I would say yes. And I think that most of the time when people talk about like working on Broadway or working in any resident theater, the biggest thing they say is that they didn't have enough time to rehearse, and that those shows usually like go up. It's like, oh, you have 4 weeks of rehearsal. And then the show opens and everyone reviews it. And then a month later, a lot of those actors are like, that's when it was good, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've been in it for a while. We sat into it. We saw it in front of an act. We had the rhythm in our bodies.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think every show can benefit from more time in front of an audience. And I don't know why. I would love to see more shows. And I think I would go more if I could see a show the way you do at Second City, which is like, oh, I'm going to go at the beginning of this process, and then I want to go back and see how it's changed and adjusted. I would be interested in, like, if Steppenwolf was like, hey, come see this show. It's real up on its feet new, but we're going to make it better. And then I would probably want to go back and see it again to be like, yeah, how'd you make it better?
Wouldn't that be bizarre if, like, Steppenwolf, like, slowly was in one play, and this play slowly melded and had a metamorphosis and transitioned into like something completely different.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf then gets cast with a group of actors who then slowly turn it into
something like Tennessee William, like, yeah.
We have to tell them that idea. That would be a dream come true.
Oh my gosh. You're like, what am I watching?
Yes.
Oh man, I only saw one Steppenwolf play, and I went. It was in the round, and me and my friend got really high before we went, and it was kind of like a sensitive subject matter, and I'm not going to say what it was because I laughed, and it would make me seem like a bad person. But we were like giggling so hard and trying to stop ourselves from laughing while it was in the round, and everybody. It like got so serious, and like we were just like trembling and like hitting each other to like both stop laughing, like stop laughing. Oh my God, yes. It was so fun and so awful at the same time that we were doing that.
That's so
we're
funny.
The worst.
No, I love that the end of that was, it was so fun.
It was so fun because you couldn't laugh. And it's so fun when you can't laugh and you're laughing.
Yes, and you can't stop. And you're like, yeah, it feels like such a treat.
Yeah. That's why comedy, like, you know, is inherently mixed with taboo topics, right? Yeah. Because like when you know you're like something's too dark or like, ooh, a little bit like on the line of the edge, like that's where so much comedy happens because you're like, I'm not supposed to laugh.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And now I feel like that's, you know, going back to what we talked about earlier, there's like this like challenge in the zeitgeist of like a lot of things are off topic or we need to be careful about. But there's no, yeah, I think we're like at a stage with a lot of things where it's like, then avoid it. Yeah. You know, and it's like, wait, can you find that safe spot and that levity and that joy in some of these topics that's welcoming and fun and not just being an asshole or being a naysayer about things that we're like, well, these are like, you know, good behavior things too. I'm being so vague. No, I'm like, what are you thinking out of safety. Yeah. Yes. But you know, because there is so much that's taboo. It's a challenge for comedy, but it's also what creates comedy, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting. So rarely am I like, don't talk about this. Yeah. Most of the time it's like, well, why are you talking about this? And what is it that you really want to say? Because I don't think that we're sick. I don't think that the idea is don't talk about a topic. I do think that it's like, oh, you don't have the experience to talk about that topic in a way that is nuanced, or you think just by like we were talking about with like the cheering, it's like you think by talking about this topic, you're doing enough, but you haven't done like the research into it, or like you think it's bad or good, but you don't have the point of view of why.
Oh yeah, man, I heard something the other day about breaking rules in general in life, and knowing you have to like 100% know the rule and like find the value in the goodness in the rule to break the rule. And like that's kind of true with comedy, right?
100%.
Like if you're like going out and just being edgy just to be edgy, you're probably kind of just being an asshole. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. It's like
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's like when someone tells you like, my friends tell me I'm super honest, and you're like, ooh, I bet that means you're just like
you're
mean.
Just mean. Yeah. Yeah. Boy, I don't know. It's so interesting.
But I interrupted you. Go on.
Oh, no. I think that's the end of that thought. But it is just funny that like when you're not supposed to laugh, that's often what makes us want to laugh.
Yes. Well, and what a joyful thing to watch. And I think that's it too, is like one of the first lessons is just emotion and showing emotion, because it's really the first rule that you get to break. Even before whether or not you're talking about a taboo topic, actually, if you say something in a scene and I show that I'm really upset or that I'm really hurt or that I'm really happy, that will get a laugh, because we know in society we're not supposed to show that much emotion, right? So it's like, we're inherently breaking a taboo just by
right.
reacting in front of a group of people, honestly.
Having a release.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's like that's already really dynamic to watch because it's something that so often we're not allowed to do, or so often the thing I find myself laughing about when I'm with my friends. It's like, I could totally see that comment made you mad. That is so funny.
Yeah. Yeah, as someone who's like, God, I have such a dark sense of humor. Like that's like often my taboo, right? Is like that I want to cross. And like it's so funny working with kids because like so many of the shows like I've like directed, I've been like, yes, go more dark.
I've seen those shows. They're very funny.
And it's just I'm like, I hope your parents are okay with this. And often they are, as far as I know. But like that's often my taboo of like, I was just thinking about this the other day about like solo scenes that I have and like how many of them are like dealing with death or some like intrinsically awful like murder. You know, I have that one bit where the kid finds his entire family dead. And he's like, ha ha ha, I know this is just a joke, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's awful.
That is awful. That's such a funny scene though.
So awful.
That's a good bit.
But I have a lot of scenes like that.
But it goes back, I mean, because you are not a dark person. I think it's interesting. You do have a dark sense of humor or like playing those. But I find in life, you are not a dark like it must be a fun thing to explore because you don't normally do that in life, right? Do I?
I don't know. I think I am a dark person in a I always and I have a few friends that agree with me on this, that I feel like listen, there could have been a few couple things that just happened in my life as a child that would have pushed me over the edge to being a psychopath. And I really think I don't think like I'm 36 now. I'm like, if I was going to be a psycho, I'm not a psycho, but I'm like, there's a couple things as a child that if you saw me, you'd be like, oh, that kid's going to grow up to be a psycho. And I just escaped. But like, there's could be a couple like conditioning things that like, had they happened, it would have been enough to push me over the edge.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I do think I have a very like, should I just tell on myself?
Yeah, I'm like,
I said this out loud the other day to like a couple people and I'm like, this is so awful. I just lull my brain to sleep every night thinking about a bunch of like machine guns, like shooting, not people necessarily. Just shooting things or like bombs like exploding and like destruction, like that just makes my brain, it's just like such a soothing like a soothing spot in my brain of like just imagining like going into like fight against like the Persians, get all the people off the ship. We're not going to kill people, this is not about killing people, but just like have modern day weapons and just get to go to town on those wooden ships. This is like, it's not even a joke. This is how I lull myself to sleep a lot. It's just a relaxing thing for me. Is that fucking messed up?
I don't think so.
Here's the thing though, like I don't know. I truly don't think would ever want to do anything awful, right?
No. Right? I've never, I feel like there's something hearing you tell this where they say like the best characters like reveal something that is both like inevitable and surprising.
Oh
no. But like it makes sense even just to hear you say like I was lulled. Like it's not like it makes you excited. It's like a lulling.
Yeah, it's like it's very bizarre. That's
so funny. Did you, when you said it to your group of friends, were they like, oh, or were they like?
I think I said it to Eli. I think Matt told Eli because I've told my husband before, and Eli's like, yeah, that of course. Eli Weatherby is like the person I've collaborated with the most in like the comedy world as far as just like doing shows on stage.
Yeah, I like
what a sick, and he's a sicko much. Too.
That's a perfect pairing.
Anyways, I'm embarrassed I just told on myself, but
no, don't be. I love it. I'm trying to think if there's anything I have. Yeah, I mean, I think this again just goes back to the beginning, which is like being nice and being positive, but also being like, oh yeah, like there's more there, and it does filter. It's not about hiding it. It's about like, oh yeah, that shows up. That shows up in so much of the work I do is like these themes or this this aspect of like sadness or like, we're
of course, of course we all have the capacity for violence. We are evolved creatures, just like fight for our survival. That's built into us. And so of course, don't act on it and don't like fan the flame every night you go to sleep like I do. But of course, taboo. Oh boy. I told too much.
Brother has 2 beautiful dogs, and he was saying he just moved and he had these strangers coming to pick up furniture for his house. And so he was selling a couch, and they walked in and the dog went crazy, and they were like, whoa, does he bark or does he bite? And my brother was like, not yet.
Yeah.
But he was like, I didn't want to be like, no, strangers, welcome into my home. And he was like, also, he is an animal. We could all bite. And I was like, oh yeah, just like people, to that point of oh yeah, this person would never. I feel like that's one of the things that keeps coming up.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
This person would never do this. Oh no, this person would have never done that. It's well, I bet so. I bet that person could lie about that. I bet that person could have done, just because we're all humans who make mistakes, but then also get afraid that we've made mistakes and make deeper mistakes, which is why Breaking Bad is a relatable show at some level. You're
yes. Matt and I are watching that right now. He's watching for the first time. We're rewatching it.
Fun.
What an arc of following someone become an anti-hero and staying on their side for a lot of people. Yeah. I sure did.
Yeah.
I was gonna say to you too. I decided that I'm trying to every month or so find a topic right now and be give myself a little bit more than a surface level understanding of it. Something that I'm already inherently interested in, so it's not just homework. But it's been World War II month for me. Oh no. But I'm listening to Hardcore History right now on the Ostfront, and is it Dan Carlin? Is he the host of that? Yeah. Whoever the host of that is, Dan Carlin, I think. He was talking about the whole idea of World War II and the idea that Germans and all these people are just people who all did awful things. So it's of course we all can do it. He was talking about a study they did. I believe it was in the States. Have you heard of the study where they they tested this out on the American public, and it was 2 rooms. And in one room, somebody was they got a person to come in who saw an ad in the paper to push a buzzer or push a button every time someone answered a question wrong to give them an electric shock.
Yeah, I have heard about this.
Yeah. And the voltage would go up each time they got it wrong, and they had a tape recording on the other side of the room, and people would pound on the wall as it intensified, and it would keep going up and up, and the other person who was running the test was no, you can't stop. And they would do it almost all, majority of the time, everyone would do it until the person went from screaming in pain and begging to stop screaming, and you would imagine was dead from the voltage, and they would keep buzzing them and or shocking them, and it was quiet. And I was yeah, most people in the US did it.
That's
because they were told to.
Yes. Well, that's, I was listening to something, I think in the New York Times on the Daily, that was talking about the January 6th, all the people who are going to be charged for storming the Capitol.
Oh, yeah.
And that some of them are claiming the same thing, which is that our leader told us to do it.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what they were saying is from a legal defense, that is a legal defense that you can say someone in authority told me to do something and I had to follow them.
Yeah.
But also it doesn't give you permission to break the law. And I think that that's such an important lesson. As someone, I think I was taught to listen to authority. It's something I constantly am checking in myself now, all the time, just to be why am I doing this? Is it because it's right? Or is it because I think I have to do what this person told me to do? Or hey, this doesn't make sense. Did I just blindly do what that email told me to do, even though I didn't want, Yeah,
you have a moral obligation still to, not listen to leaders.
Yeah.
Like, you're not off the hook because a leader told you to do something.
Yeah. And even what does a leader become? Like if this is your podcast and you were like, hey, sit backwards and drink this water upside down. I'd be like, well, okay.
I guess I have to.
Yeah. Then at what point are you like, no?
I think we're also, that's one thing we train into ourselves as improvisers is yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes in niche situations where the detriment needs to be no.
Yeah.
And like we've talked, in this community a lot this past year about abuse in the theaters.
Yeah.
And like, man, how much easier does that spread when the idea is be a good ensemble member, say yes, right? Like it's like potentially a breeding zone for taking advantage of people, right? Yeah. Or like having somebody be in an ensemble or a class and something happened that they didn't feel comfortable with, but you're just in this like this world of like yes, 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 right? It's like, oh boy, like I could definitely see where that can get taken advantage of. And
I won't teach yes and now without talking about yes and bullying. They go hand in hand on like the very first day. And whenever I talk about yes and for the first time, it's like, oh, and also know that this could be used as a weapon. Like if these things are happening to you, you're not in a yes and scenario. You're in a yes and someone is using yes and to bully you into doing something.
Yep. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly that was exactly like, well, I can say exactly, but it's probably a big part of letting like theaters in Chicago be a breeding zone for all sorts of things, whether it's like mental abuse, sexual abuse, racism, like whatever it was, like the idea of like.
Yeah. And it's such a shame. There are so many ways in which I feel like that impulse to say yes to things has led me to take on projects that were way too hard. And I learned so much and I did so much because of like not wanting. I give Chicago credit because I think sometimes we're like, oh, that bridge is halfway laid down. I trust that it'll all be there by the time I ride to the end of it. And I think it creates really great circumstances in art, but then also the ways in which that is like completely unsafe. And trying to hold in my hand that both of those can be true. That it's like, oh yeah, here's this thing that I value for the experience it gave me, but also can't keep happening. We can't keep asking people to go across a bridge that that isn't fully formed.
Yeah.
At least without giving them like a parachute for when we inevitably fall.
And that's, and there's been a number of things we've spoken about today is that's been like, there is so much gray area in the performing world and in like comedy that like you taking a hard line on anything is going to have you at times cause you to miss the point.
Yeah.
Right? If you take a hard line on yes, if you take a hard line on,
yeah.
Like, yeah. It's our ability to be flexible and like read the moment, read the audience, like know the spirit of the times and like.
And ask questions and like not be afraid to be like, hey, in an improv scene, right? If it was like, we're dating now, kiss me. It would be like, wait a second. We don't just kiss or move on. We could talk about it. Honestly, it'd be like, wait, this is really surprising to me that I think even inviting that like, whoa, which would be totally dynamic to watch in an improv scene, right? To watch one actor be like, whoa, let's figure this out and see what's happening. To be like, oh, I get to do that as a person when I'm negotiating my salary for something. I get to be like, hey, this doesn't make sense. Or like, whoa, this is we need to talk about it and figure this out. I don't just have to accept it. And I also don't have to just be like, no, and that it's like, oh, wait, let's have the hard conversations. And let's also teach people how to have those hard conversations because confrontation in this community is so hard. Every single time I feel like I have to confront someone about something, I'm like, oh God, this is the end. It's like, no, it's not. It's all fine. It's always fine.
Yeah. And if like getting back to that grit and not just nice, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you avoid that confrontation, it's like, it lacks substance, right?
Yeah. And what a disservice to everyone as well. Like, if we're going to go back to the idea, and something I keep reminding myself of is like, if I'm in the room and I'm not contributing, I'm wasting everyone's time and I'm wasting my life. So what are the things that if I'm here, it's because my opinions or my questions or my outlook is valuable.
Yep.
So it doesn't do any good to hide that or to just be like, okay. Oh, sure. That people matter and that it's okay to disagree with something or it's okay to bring up a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I hope so.
There's actually more I want to get into.
Yeah, tell me. I can't wait.
I feel like, okay, we'll call it here since it's an hour, but maybe we'll tease the next one we do.
I love it. Yeah.
I want to talk to you about teaching overseas.
Yeah.
Teaching in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Which in directing, like that's so like all of these things we just spoke about are seen through a different lens and like, yeah, that becomes a thing.
Yeah. I would love it. Go on. Go ahead.
I want to get into it right now. Oh man. And also traveling together because you're like one of my favorite travel buddies.
There are so few people that I would take a trip with. And you're one of them.
Yeah. We've traveled we've traveled to teach together a lot.
Yeah.
That's the main way we've traveled. In New York for, I guess, over 6 weeks total over the course of 3 years.
That was amazing.
And
Budapest.
Let's not tease it up. Let's just talk about it. Yeah, Bucharest. Yeah. And New Orleans.
Yeah.
Jess, you're the best travel partner.
Thank you.
And we've had this discussion before about like, you need a certain something from a travel companion.
Yes.
And we just work together.
It is. I'm so glad you said that because I feel the same way. And it's just so lovely when you find someone that you're like, I genuinely love doing this thing with this person. And it's not because we do things the same way, right? Yeah. It's not because we want to do the same things. It's just like a lovely meshing and acceptance and also independence.
Yeah, and understanding that like the right amount of time spent together, the right amount of like, I'll take ownership of planning something for myself. I'll take ownership of planning something together, and the right amount of like willy-nilly-ness of like, let's do this. Of course, let's do this.
My favorite
which you're so good at
ever. I mean, top 10 days of my life was probably that day that we ate a ton of food at the Olive Garden in Times Square. Went to Central Park and then scalped tickets to see the Rocky musical on Broadway.
That was all the same day?
I think it was all the same day.
That was an amazing day.
That was an amazing day.
What a powerful choice to be in New York and being like in Times Square and be like, we've got, first of all, we had like a good stipend to work with. So like we could go eat wherever we want and didn't have to worry about the money. And then be like, but you know what we want to do? Is go eat at Olive Garden.
We wanted those unlimited, I think it was like soup, salad, breadsticks, and wine. And we drank some wine.
And we did exactly what we wanted to do. We weren't ashamed of like, we're doing Olive Garden in New York.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a little bit, but.
Yeah. It was it felt like a, like mischief. I'm interested recently in like just the level of mischief that is coming into the joyful moments. And I think that was a day of like, this feels kind of mischievous.
Yeah, like when you were like, let's go see Rocky, the musical. When we say Rocky, we mean
Rocky Balboa.
Yeah. Which was my first Broadway musical ever to see. And Jess is like, let's buy these tickets from the scalper. And we gave him
$200.
Was it $200? We gave him, that's a chunk of change for me.
For me too.
There's other people who are like, yeah, of course, $200, right? I'm like, and then he ran. Like he got out of there. And then we were standing in line and we started looking at our tickets and our tickets didn't look like anybody else's tickets. And we were like, oh no. And then we went through the line and I was still like, they're going to come and get us once we sit down,
Yes, the whole first act, I think we were both just ready for someone to be like, you're sitting in our seats, get up.
And if you haven't seen Rocky the Musical, I don't think you can anymore, right?
You can't. It was only open for like 4 months, I think.
And it was not great, but it was so awesome.
Yeah. That's the perfect way to describe it. It was such...
The music wasn't memorable. The acting was whatever, and the story, right? Mm-hmm. You want to know what my favorite part of the whole thing was? The set.
Yeah.
The set, the changing of the set. My favorite moment in the show was when for the final fight, they brought the stage. They took the people in the front few rows and they made it in the round. They had them go on stage, and the boxing ring moved center, and they boxed, and like Rocky came in, and who's the Apollo Creed, and they boxed, and people were standing on their feet in this theater cheering.
It was amazing.
And like it felt like you were at a sporting event, but completely invested in the drama and narrative of the character fighting. And like, just to this day, my favorite thing about that was the actors taking their bow at the end, because the actors took their bow in a celebratory way as like, we just fucking won, and like got to absorb it. And there's always this like humility of an actor taking a bow and they go, oh yes, yes, yes. But it was just like, we were all cheering together of like, it was amazing. My hair was standing on my arms while I was explaining that to everyone.
I'm so glad I was at like a retreat for directors, and then like all these very prestigious directors from all over the world, and the man who was facilitating was like, what's everyone's favorite theatrical moment? And I was like, I've got to tell you, I saw this moment in Rocky, and everyone was like, we don't respect you anymore. But I was like, it was truly, and I think there's something about that of like, to have 50 people stand, leave their seats, go on stage, sit in new seats, and have it all be like a regular part. Like, it was just so special to watch, and there was so much craft that went into making this moment in a Broadway show, like a sporting event.
Yep.
And we never get to feel that way at a Broadway show. Not never, but it's rare. That is really cool. Yeah,
it was very cool. Also ties back to kind of like the idea of you're talking about, of like, what's the new creative thing we bring into the theater that, you know, doesn't just make it, you sit out in the audience and, you know.
We'll talk.
Yeah. The next year we saw Les Mis together, which arguably should be the better musical, right? The more famous one. And I really disliked it.
I disliked it too. Did we leave? We stayed the whole time.
I think we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anytime someone talks about Les Mis, because I think that was even it too. We were like, oh, we were so nervous about not wanting to spend so much money and see something that wasn't good that then we saw Les Mis and we're just like, are we crazy? Which is so interesting.
Yeah, isn't that? Because we should have technically liked that more.
Yeah, and it's like more renowned. Yeah, it has this huge legacy.
Yeah. I always feel that way when I go to like operas and stuff like that. Then I'm like, I know I'm supposed to like this, and so I'm liking it partly because I know I'm supposed to. Yeah. And then it's that type of fun. What do they call that? Like type 2 fun or whatever, or type 3 fun. I forget which one it is, where it's like in the moment it's not fun.
Yeah.
It's like working out really hard.
Yep.
You know, it's like in the moment it's not fun, but afterwards it's really fun.
I like hearing that. I don't know that I've heard.
And I feel that way about a lot of theater stuff. I'm like, I'm supposed to like this. And then afterwards I'm glad I had that cultural event. But in the moment I'm like, fucking end.
Yeah. I always talk about that.
That's so bad.
No, I think it's an important thing to talk about, of like how often in a play you stand there, and that's why teaching sketch comedy, a lot of times people will want to print the RO in like the program. It's like, here are the scenes. And I'm like, no. And I always say, like, how often have you seen a play that have all the songs listed, and there's a part of your brain that's like, check, how many songs do we have until we go?
Yes.
Like, again, maybe we're just finding out that people don't like theater. I hope that's not it, but...
And maybe we're finding out it's just like, you know, it's the same thing with music too, right? It's like, you know, like how many of us really appreciate, like Matt, my husband, like really appreciates going to like a symphony because he's a cellist. But I'm like, all these songs sound the same to me after a while.
Yeah. How many? Are we done? No? Okay.
Yeah. And some of these things that like, aren't updated, right?
Yeah.
Don't speak to us anymore. My husband told me that like when people used to go to like concerts, like I don't know, I'm gonna get this wrong. It was like Beethoven or so and so, that people would like faint. People would truly faint because they were like having an overwhelming experience of like such a magnitude. Because most people weren't like hearing music like that and this intensity. Now we're just so used to it, right? And I'm like at one of those shows, and I'm like, you have to end this. Please end this.
Yeah. So interesting.
Make this 30 minutes.
Yeah. What are the things that we're doing that are like taking medicine? When are we attending a cultural event?
Type 2 fun?
Yeah.
We'll say that's type 2. I don't know if it is, but is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well,
it's fun afterwards? Is it fun afterwards?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think that we're doing it. I think that's actually something I'm interested in theater too, is like, what is the difference between theater I'm excited to go to versus theater that is important to watch? And how much of culture at some point, so like an opera, because I've only been to one opera, and I believe that it is a truly dynamic art form. I have friends who direct opera, and they're doing a truly imaginative, groundbreaking work. The only opera I saw was Medicine, to take of like, I'm not enjoying this. And I feel like I have to in order to be a better person. I don't know that I guess I'm enjoying telling you about it now.
Yeah, no, I that's how I feel about a decent amount of things.
Yeah. So maybe that's it, of like making more things not type 2 fun and being like, why is this type 2 fun? And how can we make it type 1 fun when it comes to things that are entertainment? So specifically like theater or concert or opera, and
also I would argue like the length of time that something is, like how long a show is it part of that? For me, it's like, are we saying that we have to like, I feel that way about books. Like, I'm like, I don't need a book to be really long.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel like they're getting more bang from their money if they buy a book and it's a lot longer. I don't feel that way. I feel a sense of relief after I get through each chapter.
Yeah.
And I, this is so such an uncultured swine, but I feel that way a lot, where I'm like, I just want a little less, actually.
Yeah. I was listening. I'm glad you said books. I was listening to a podcast about reading, and that was like one of the things that the woman said was like, we get this question a lot. How do you read so much? And they're like, because we love it. And so if you're not reading a ton, maybe you don't like reading, which is fine, but maybe find an audiobook that you really love. But also, what are you reading? And are you reading a book because you think you have to for self-betterment? Or are you finding books that really speak to you and that you really love reading?
Yeah.
That's like, I could read 45 romance novels that are 99 cents and they bring me pleasure. Versus that like one wellness book that I haven't gotten all the way through. Yeah. When is it worth powering through? Yeah. And when is it like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or when are you like, I haven't read in a long time. And it's like, why? It's like, because I'm trying to read one book that I don't want to read. Yeah. And so I have just stopped reading.
Yeah. Well, I listen to most things now.
Yeah.
And that's better for me. I retain more. I enjoy it more. I do get bummed because I do like taking notes when I read. Like I underline and circle, and like I read a lot of nonfiction. And so I love taking notes, and that's the one thing that I do hate about listening. I think I retain quite a bit listening, but like I really do like taking like notes, and it's really just too much work to be like, I'm going to listen to this and sit down in front of a notebook and write down notes.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like the book industry should figure out. I feel like that should be, I've also gotten more into like listening. I would always rather listen to something. But I also love to take notes. I wish there was a way to even like speak. I don't know. I wonder what that looks like.
It never feels fluid. Like sometimes I will stop and like take like a couple notes. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't want to lose that idea. But it's just like, I don't know. It's just not the same. And like going back and referencing the notes is not the same as when you go through a book. Like I love the process of like paging through my books and like seeing an underlined section or like a section that's like starred a little bit more because I'm like, I like this a lot.
Yeah.
And finding the notes in that way. And I don't like the process of like looking back through like audio clip notes or like trying to match up a timestamp with I got to go listen. It's just, that doesn't work very well.
I wonder if there would be a way for like, do you listen on Audible?
I listen on almost exclusively on Audible unless it's podcast or like Hardcore History. I think I've just like downloaded it right from his site.
I've been getting more into Audible and I think I love it except for what you're just saying, which is like, I wanted to share something with my brother and couldn't find it. And I was like, I don't even know what this is called. I wish there maybe was a way to star in Audible.
You can take notes. You can. There's bookmarks. But the problem is just like, you have to like type out the thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's something different about underlining the exact thing they said and finding in the context, being able to quickly read, whatever. I guess that's the price I pay for being lazy.
I was like, I don't know why I feel like I need to solve this for Audible, but let me try.
I was going to end this earlier because we were at the hour mark, but I can't stop talking to Jess. She's a delight. Jess, will you please come back and do another one?
I would love it.
I feel like I always can talk to you.
That would be a dream.
You're such a delight.
I'm also very excited as soon as we hang up to ask you a million more questions.
Yeah, I know. We're going to hang out. We're going to have wine in the backyard. If you're watching and you're noticing the lights are flickering, if you're watching on the YouTube, it's because this shitty ass house I live in, when anyone runs the dryer, now there's like a flickering.
No.
And we had a landlord like come and check it out. And as he does with everything, he's like, okay. And doesn't fix anything. So I hope you're enjoying the strobe light effect. Yeah, it wasn't in your imagination if you're seeing it. That is absolutely happening in my house.
God bless whoever's drying their clothes.
Yeah.
It's great.
I hope they're so dry.
They're so dry.
Also, there's like way more people living in this apartment than are like technically allowed to be. So there's a lot of clothes drying.
Is that how many people are upstairs?
A lot. A lot. They just like keep moving in. Man, I just keep meeting another person. It's only one unit up there with like 3 bedrooms.
Whoa.
It's at least 6. Thanks everybody for listening. Bye. Jessica, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
You're the best.
You're the best.
Come on, dance appetite. Dance to the middle of the night. Come on, dance, wake up the appetite. Dance to the middle of the night. Come on, dance, wake up the appetite. Dance to the middle of the night. Come on, dance, wake up the appetite. Dance to the middle of the night. Yeah.